I think just for before we start the conversation, I would like to do it again, just to allow it to sink, and maybe now that we have had more of a perspective, we will sit differently. The card again, okay? I have included among these remedies to avoid the misuse and excess of the passions, the forethought and diligence through which we can correct our natural faults by striving to separate within ourselves the movements of the blood and spirits from the thoughts to which they are usually joined. So this is the Cartesian split. Okay, guys? Got it? Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark.
Hi, Mark.
A couple points. First, that the universe took 13.7 years to 50 billion years to get to reflect on itself. It's a very human, anthropocentric way of looking at it. Maybe there are other beings in the universe that got here to reflect on the universe before 13.7 billion years. Second, science does not tell us that we're insignificant, that we are a speck in the middle of nowhere. That is a myth of science. That is not what science says. Science does not make a normative claim that we're insignificant. That is purely a myth, and a myth that should be blasted to pieces. Second, or third actually, I guess, it sounds as if you are saying that the spiritual world is different from the physical world, which is the same split as the mind and the body. It's exactly that same origin. I'm wondering how you can make that separation.
Okay, I'm going to start with the last one.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that the spirit world is separated from the physical world.
That's what it sounded like. I'm sorry.
Okay, it sounds like, because again, it's built in our own beings. That's how we see things. The very fact that you have noticed that just shows, and the very fact that the way I have communicated myself to you have given life to this idea just shows that how much we are operating under a worldview.
I don't believe that though.
It is. It's part of what we are. We cannot. It's like thinking of the archetypes. Let's think of archetypes for a moment. In archetypal astrology, we study the movements of the planets, and so archetypes. Everybody familiar with the word archetypes? Archetypes is, it was a word that, I don't know if it was coined by, but it was made famous by Carl Jung, psychologist. And it's about like these patterns, like innate patterns of thought, they are primary before humans that exist. And they would be the equivalent as to what instincts are for the body, they are for our minds. So these innate patterns, which before we're understood as gods. So what I'm saying is that we are living under the force of the gods. So there are gods on us. And when the planets are moving and doing these different alignments, there's a qualitative. It's like we learned into science. We measure quantitative time, right? The clock is measuring quantitative time, right? We measure it in numbers, like how many hours.
It's actually measuring discrete time. Quantity is impossible to count.
Exactly.
The number is discrete.
Exactly. Quality is impossible to. Our tools cannot calculate quality. Exactly. But what I'm saying is that archetypal astrology is a way of observing qualitative time. So besides having quantitative time, which is measured in numbers, we can measure qualitative time. So right now we are under, for instance, an aspect that is a square between Pluto and Uranus. It is pretty much the very same dynamics that happened back in the 60s. No wonder we are experiencing similar outcomes and similar upheavals, movements, or women's liberations, or Black Lives Matter. It's all related to what happened back in the 60s, and the eruption, and the riots, and people on the streets, and Martin Luther King, you name it. There was a quality, right? Quality in that moment that is sort of happening again right now. So what I'm saying is that we are all experiencing this quality. So even the way I'm speaking right now is being influenced by these archetypal qualities. I cannot speak from outside of the archetypes. That's what science thinks it does. It gives us a perfect explanation that is sanitized from superstition, from feelings, from emotions, or from, mistakes. And it's clean, it can be reproduced.
That's a myth of science.
It is.
There's a myth of science. That is not.
But it doesn't see itself as being part of a myth, of being a myth in itself. The myth of science is the myth that we have dispelled every myth that existed on Earth. And now we are above myth. But that's not really true from the perspective of the archetypal psychology and astrology. Science is also, we are also living a myth. Nobody can live without a myth. Which brings me to your other question about the meaning and the significance or significance. The idea that science being a perfect, rational, quantitative explanation of the cosmos, that's what I mean by the cosmos or the Earth being insignificant. What I mean is that there's no inherent meaning or purpose in the Earth. It's just there. And we attribute meaning to whatever we are studying. Whereas what I'm saying is that the cosmos itself is full of meaning. It's pregnant with meaning and purpose that we are participating in to discover. So is this an anthropocentric view of the cosmos? Yes, it is, but it's not really anthropocentric, because again, the anthropocentric view is making the comparison between human beings and the sun. And what I'm talking about is more of a geocentric mode of view. So understanding that we are what we have here. We live on Earth. We may speculate that we might live somewhere else, but this is the only life we know. This is the only reality we can experience, living on Earth.
It does seem, though, that I, as a poet, am not hearing about creating myths. We all are possible to create new meaning. I mean, that is the meaning of being human.
This is what's
not, and being a scientist, and being a philosopher.
That's a great point.
It is to create new meaning and not just be satisfied with an ancient myth.
As early as 1978, Thomas Berry, who's a philosopher and writer, professor, he's starting to say that we are living in a time in between stories. And there are other thinkers that are going in the same direction. So what is happening right now is that we are experiencing the breakdown, the collapse of an old myth that is not functioning well anymore. But we are not going directly into a new myth. So what is this old myth? It's the myth of patriarchy. It's the myth of modernity. It's the myth of Prometheus. All that is cracking.
God is dead, and we are living in his decomposing corpse.
Exactly. So this is postmodernity, precisely. That's what Nietzsche was seeing happening. That was his despair, to see that age was coming. The moment where we would walk in this liminal space, in a time in between stories. The time in between stories, this liminal space, it's hard to find meaning there, because we are lost. It's perfect. It matches perfectly our cosmology. The cosmology that tells us that we are adrift in this huge cosmos without any sense of direction or purpose. That's precisely Bob Dylan, who deserved, the Nobel Prize, because this is exactly what he's talking about when he says, how does it feel, to be on your own, no direction home. This is at the core of the postmodern cosmology. We are without direction home. What I'm proposing here,
that's one of the themes, but it's not the whole thing.
Just real quick, we're going to make sure we can share.
yeah, nothing is the whole story, of course.
Hi, thanks so much.
True.
I wanted to ask, I'm not quite sure that I understand what you mean by psychedelic futurism,
Okay.
and what the dark side
Great.
of that is.
Perfect.
I'd love
Thank
to
you so
hear
much.
and
Yeah, this is what was left.
Okay.
I was planning to talk about
yeah.
this.
And if I may, like Mark, I was a little bit unclear how you understand in the more earth-based cosmological spirituality. This is also very physical, right?
Yes.
Yes, and material.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in this sun-centered Cartesian split, the real is reduced to the physical and the material.
Well,
Right? But in the earth, so you see the point of clarification I'm asking you about?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so in the earth-based, indigenous, yes, so these are also material, physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
The real also expresses itself through the material.
Right.
Yes, but you also seem to be making a point we can't reduce everything to the physical or the material.
Yes.
And that the earth-based spiritualities don't do that. Right? But at the same time, I'm not hearing from you where the non-physical is
Right.
in the earth-based. Does
So-
that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
From the archetypal perspective, this is very complicated, and maybe it has to do with your questions too, because our mode of rational mind cannot deal with paradox. Paradox is to be either avoided or resolved. Whereas from the archetypal perspective, paradox is at the core of understanding. So everything is actually paradoxical. So, the point is not trying to resolve paradox or to find, an answer. So when an archetypal, let's say an archetypal force or being presents itself to you, it can show many different faces. It's multivalent. So when we're talking about planetary archetypes, people may say, well, Pluto or Saturn, they are known as being difficult archetypes, and our tendency is to categorize things. So we're going to say Jupiter is a good archetype because Jupiter is related to expansion, health, success, and good luck. Whereas Pluto is like the force of nature, destruction, death, and rebirth. And Saturn would be limitation, endings of things, constraints, limits, getting down to, get down to earth and reality and stop dreaming, things like that, which was usually, attributed to death, like death meaning the end of things. But if we really want to understand the world through the lenses of archetypal psychology or what indigenous people are doing, they're not trying to solve paradox. They're more than content in just being in paradox, because it's by being in paradox that you can reach that deeper meaning that won't come through rationalizing about something. So it's like the haikus, right? The Japanese, the point is not trying to find, we can, try to figure it out. That's pretty much what the Western mind does. That's what we do when we are writing our dissertations. That's what we do when we are, in school. I love doing that. I'm a very mental person, but I'm just trying to bring it to balance and to understand that some things they operate on an entirely different level. Now, for psychedelic futurism, what I'm saying is that this idea of blending or merging mind and technology, right? I was tapping into that a little bit, but I didn't have the chance to fully explore it. I think the best way to address this particular issue is by invoking the film Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. Is everybody familiar with the film? Have everybody watched this film? So I think this is probably one of the most important films ever made in the history of humanity, and also one of the most misinterpreted pieces of cinematography ever. Because as soon as I mention 2001, there's a tendency of people to say, oh yeah, that idea of the alien consciousness, the monolith being placed there by aliens, which brings us to the topic that I was discussing earlier about the necessity we have to apply that mirroring of the physicality and say, well, if that monolith was there, it may represent it's something that was created by some other being that placed that monolith there. So in the end, what we have is a film about extraterrestrial intelligence interfering in human affairs. But there's a totally different reading for that film that would use archetypal psychology and maybe a little bit of other disciplines that don't go in that direction. That meaning is that the monolith is mystery itself. The monolith is like the teleology of the universe. The monolith is what gave birth to the story that we are now following blindly. So the contact, when the first apes had contact with that monolith, they changed, there's something happened in their consciousness, and then the ape gets the piece of bone and starts bending the bone, right? And then it throws the bone and it turns into the space station, right? So he's taking this huge leap from the primal apes to, human beings in space. And then what we have, if you pay close attention, when Kubrick is depicting human beings, there's not a single natural element in the scene. There are no plants, there's nothing natural there, and they have no emotions whatsoever. So everybody's very bureaucratic when they're discussing the issues or the discovery of the monolith, and they have all these government people. They're all talking as if they were automatons in some way. There's no feelings. They are totally deprived of emotions. And what happens is that throughout the journey, the person who will show the first signs of emotion is Hall, the computer, and not any kind of human being. And then it's a journey that takes the main character through sort of a shamanic dismemberment, right? He starts being attacked, and all the other, the crew, they slowly start dying and being murdered by Hall, until we reach the peak of the film when there's the entire psychedelic journey. Now, what's happening there, I think, what was Kubrick's intention, is to show us an alchemical journey and something that has started long ago, some shit that happened in consciousness that put us in the path that we are right now. And that is, in a way, what Freud would call the death instinct, which in mythic terms is Thanatos, it's the god of death. And in scientific terms, it's known as entropy. The idea that the universe is slowly going to, destroy itself, dissolve itself back into a completely inert state, sort of dissolving all the tensions and the homeostatic tensions that maintain the equilibrium. So the equilibrium is maintained because there are these, opposite forces being played around with each other. There's constant tension. When you eliminate tension, then you eliminate the very principle of life. And I think in part what the psychedelic futurism or transhumanism or uploading consciousness in computers is trying to tell us is that story. It's sort of a longing to die an easy death, or it's a longing to seize every kind of organic process, because organic processes are difficult. If we can download our consciousness to computer, upload our consciousness into computers, we could, that's what people think. We could experience virtual reality as if it was reality, but we would be in control of it, right? We could do whatever we please. We can be whoever we want to be. And we don't have to experience pain, we don't have to experience sorrow, we don't have to experience indigestion, we don't have to experience, we don't have to experience death, we don't have to experience sickness. All these things, and death meaning the process of dying. So, but ultimately, you are going towards some kind of death. It's the death of life as an organic process itself, which we are not entirely at home with, because it brings so much. And our culture teaches us that if you are feeling sick or if you are in pain, we should take medications to alleviate the pain. So the pain is something that we want to keep at bay. We don't want to get there. But sometimes being there is exactly what we need to be fully alive, or to have the experience of being fully alive. So the story that Kubrick is telling us is that story of the human mind going more and more into the direction of this total development of conquest of space. And what happens is when he reaches the outer skirts of the solar system, he gets crazy, he goes into the psychedelic journey, which is experiencing death. So he goes through this shamanic death process, and he is reborn in the end. After making sense of everything that happened to him, the last scene in the film, you see the star baby coming back to Earth. So he had to be born out there, exploring the cosmos, to be reborn as the Earth itself, as Gaia consciousness. So we are all impelled and driven toward this death instinct somehow. And that's where technology becomes dangerous. That's when it becomes something that we should be careful about. Because in the end, it's not a tool that we are using anymore, but we are being used by our tools. So, the idea is to try to balance Again, I'm not an advocate of going back to pre-technological times. That's not the point at all. I think we live in a post-technological. We have to think of a post-technological era. So we need to integrate the aspects of ourselves that through this story, through this line of narrative, have been lost. And these aspects they have mythical, magical, somatic, embodied, emotional quality that just won't fit the current narrative that we have for ourselves. Does it clarify? Okay, so who was... okay, you.
What was the last dream you remember?
The last dream I remember? Well, I usually remember parts of my dreams every night. And I have been paying close attention to my dreams here while in California. They're entirely different than the dreams I had in Brazil. And even when I slept one night here in San Francisco, my dream was completely different than the dreams I had in Oakland. So I have a close relationship with my dreams. But at the same time, when I wake up and if I have a lot to do, which I have a lot to do now because I'm not only presenting this to you, but I'm crowdfunding a campaign right now. There's something that I want to show you, and there's a lot happening. As soon as I wake up and I focus my mind on the errands and the things that I have to do, let's go.
So you don't remember anything?
I remember, sometimes I don't remember anything, sometimes what remains is a feeling, and I let this feeling guide me. So this feeling is like, whatever is happening to me during the day, I'm guided by that feeling that was left by the dream, even though I can't recall the dream like in images or in the narrative. But some dreams, I remember them clearly. Like a dream that I had 2 days ago, and I'm still digesting what I experienced. Thank you. Okay, so can you kind of keep track of who is,
Yeah, so we have 2 questions there.
I don't want to skip anyone,
Okay, yeah, so I think there's 3 right now. Did you ever?
She had her arm,
Okay, sure.
Just going back to the point what you said about kind of like entropy, right? And then like that many transhumanists kind of like are moving closer towards death in a certain way. But I'd say that it's exactly what they want to avoid. Like if you take
that's paradoxical.
like also like I don't know, Kick Rider, like people were talking about mind uploading. It's exactly that they want to overcome death, right? That they're longing for this eternal life, this kind of like from cosmic perspectives, this like never-ending like journey of like more complex, interesting structures, and just like kind of like would not be colonizing, but just spreading through the universe, whatever it is, what it is. Like, but do you think that they just got it wrong? Or is it just a semantic term of what they mean by life and what you mean by life? Because you were alluding to it being organic and it being, like tied to biology. Is it just a semantic difference, or do you think they're just on the wrong track? Or
who are they?
Well, kind of transhumanists who are trying to beat death via mind uploading or via. I think there's yes. No, I got you. Mind uploading not working, but like there's other ways in which you might overcome death in the future. So do you think they?
I think it's a resistance.
Wrong?
I think it's a resistance. I think there is paradox there. So when there's paradox, I'm not going to try to solve the paradox. So like you said, it's trying to perpetuate life or make us immortal, but at the same time, it's sort of a dead life, right? That's why we have so many zombies and vampires are so popular today, because psychically we are experiencing that idea of that we are sort of half dead.
I get that, but I think that they're not really, they would, I think they refuse that they're, just like kind of accelerating entropy. I mean, they have this notion of extropy or extropianism, which is like the contrary of like trying to build,
syntropy.
Like the concept of extropy.
But have you ever heard that word, syntropy?
Yes, also, but yeah.
Yeah. Syntropy would be the precise opposite of that. Is that the necessity of the cosmos to recreate yourself at every moment. It's like the person who coined this term, he's a permaculturist, and he works like creating, thriving like ecologies in arid places and deserted lands, and he has like this technique. So he's trying to show us, hey, listen, like even in places where it's supposedly dead, there's a lot of life trying to happen here. Only if we apply the proper techniques and allow nature to speak for itself, it's going to thrive. So there's like a tendency for the universe to create life. This creative tendency still doesn't have a name in science yet. It hasn't been fully understood or described or nailed by the scientific knowledge we have. So we're still sticking with the second law of thermodynamics, but more and more, and entropy, more and more people are starting to see that there is something else there that deserves our attention. But I think it will take us a couple of decades before we have like a good scientific explanation of this opposing force. In mythic terms, it would be Thanatos is the god of death, and Eros is the god of creation, which is related to love and libido. And in the sense of the new cosmology, my professor Brian Swim loves to talk about this. He said the universe, the primal force in the universe is love, is that impulse towards bonding. So that's how the elements transform themselves. Helium finds whatever hydrogen and create a new particle or a new element. It's through this law of bonding, of being attracted to each other, the law of attraction. But that's still to be worked in more detail. That's my opinion. I don't know if that answered your question, but in the sense of did they get it wrong? I think the whole idea of transhumanism, it's based on the wrong premises, right? It's based on the premise that death is something to be avoided at all costs, and then we can just extend life indefinitely if we apply proper techniques. So again, there's the Cartesian split here, thinking that we have the mind and then we have a physical world that is there for us to manipulate. So that's the point between the difference between the physicality of the indigenous cosmology and the physicality of the scientific cosmology, which for the scientific cosmology, the physical world is a resource to be, exploited or to be turned into goods or, to be transformed by human beings. And the physicality in the indigenous perspective, it is part of a process. So again, there's no separation like you were saying back there. I implied a separation between the spiritual and the material. That's the only vocabulary we have. That's the language we have. We need to posit the split if we want to communicate that, because we still don't have a language that is capable of bringing these two polarities together and speaking of them as a whole. We're trying, but our language is not meant to do that. Our language is based upon the premise of separation. So we have to talk about body and mind. There's no point for the indigenous people talking about body and mind. Everything is one thing. So the spiritual is just a different way of being in the world. We can perceive the world from many dimensions and many lenses. So there's, I can look at this chair right now and maybe I can have some LSD and the chair is going to transform itself into something else. Did the chair remain here? Did the chair disappear? Is there something happening? Is there a sound in the forest when there's nobody to listen to it? All these questions. So this is really complex, and it requires a big shift in language. One that I think we are still far from getting there. We still have to, get to grips with the current language that we have and understand how the terminologies we use, they lost their luminosity, because words that's what magic is all about. Words, they are powerful. Words are like spells. If you can use a word appropriately, you are casting a spell on something. But the words that we use today, they have been deprived, they have been, stripped from their luminosity, that power. So we just repeat words, like mindfulness, love, they're used in marketing campaigns and whatever. And there's a need for us to recover this sacred sense of language. And I think that we need a language to be more capable of addressing those questions that tap into paradox. I don't know if I'm taking it too far.
Just on top of this, the phenomenologists tried to deal with this. They said the reality is co-constituted consciousness of an object. And they started to give a feeling of the split, but the split in process.
Right.
And that's a beginning. So you get that from continental philosophy. You get
exactly.
The extra class.
Yeah. And adding to the phenomenologists, you could say that there's this new school of epistemology that is emerging now. It's called participatory term, and that's pretty much about it. It's about how we participate in the world. Instead of explaining the world, we're co-creating the world. So whatever experience you're having, the experiencing or nature or whatever it is trying to come into being through us, through our conscious participation with it.
Participatory mystique.
which is related to that participation mistake. That would be the like animism and the mode of.
It's often called spirituality of immanence as opposed to the spirituality of transcendence.
Perfect. That's my point.
Right there, gentleman there, and then one might have to
so-
go straight to you.
I'm sure there are many of us that are trying to bring about a world where there's a deeper understanding of these terms, both what's it like visual and somatic and linguistic. What do you think are the key experiences to help bring that about?
What I think of what?
Are the
Key experience.
yeah, what's it that what's it more people need to have, need to see, like as an experience makeup period?
I think the more kinds of experience we have that bring us close together and have a sense of like a larger self in operation, like a community, sitting in circle, doing ritual, ceremony, all these kind of experiences. I think actually, like I've been working with ayahuasca for 15 years, and for a long time I was really focused on this medicine or the substance and what it does to my mind or to my perceptions. But with time, slowly, I started to appreciate not the fact that I was, ingesting a substance that was altering my perception, but it was everything that was happening during that experience. That was what lingers. That was what was most powerful to me. The fact that I was deeply connected with the people in ceremony with me, or that we were deeply connected with the place where the ceremony was held. There was a sacred presence in everything that was happening. That sacred presence, being in the company of those people, or maybe when we were in the forest or whatever it is, being in company of that place or the other non-human beings that were inhabiting that place, animals, insects and plants and everything, that was powerful. The power then is like in having experiences that connect. That I think is going to be key for us to learn to craft a new language. So, yeah.
Gentleman here.
Hi. You said, I believe, that even if we can recognize that we're living in a matrix, we are not able to escape it because it's like a computer simulation and there is someone extraterrestrial perhaps.
If we take it literally.
If you're at a point and you may detect that you are in a matrix, how do you act?
Well, the idea of the matrix as like a computer simulation, for instance, for me it's just like a feedback loop of projections, right? Because we have created computers. We're not created out of computers. We created
Is this a
computers.
chicken and egg thing though?
Huh?
I mean, like, did the computers create the human or the human create the computer?
So we are so involved with computers right now. They're so like part of our lives. All the time we're just like, in conversation with them that we start to see the world through their lenses. We have that dialogue and we kind of, we mesh with computers and we start to think the thought of a computer. But it's not that we are actually part of a big computer game. This will be a projection. That's what I'm trying. In my perspective, this is a projection because every experience, again, every psychedelic experience, even though you can go to many different places, ultimately they are contingent. So I have a problem with, it's good that you brought that forth because I didn't have the time to unpack that. Psychedelic experience, I had this transformative experience and it changed my life. I saw these alien beings and they did some operations on me, or I saw God, I saw the Virgin Mary or whatever. You're going to see that each person will have the completely different description or narrative about the experience they had, which is pretty much because the experience is based upon a series of variables that are informing that person's life. So, where are you coming from? How was your childhood? What kind of family? The language you speak? The country you live in? The cultural milieu you inhabit? What kind of work you have? When you're commuting to work, what kind of contact you have with the outer world? What is it? Like it's a city? You live in the country? All these things are going to play a part in the experience, and in the way you bring this experience back and tell it to other people or even to yourself. Again, you're creating a narrative out of chaos, because with the ego death, it's like it puts us in chaos. It's like creative chaos. If you leave chaos, like operating for long, it starts to create order. That's what like Ilya Prigogine and others were studying, like order out of chaos. So we get back like to that primordial chaos, and we try to make meaning of it, like bringing it back through stories. but our stories are metaphysical. So we may say these are alien beings that are, dealing with us, or there is like this giant computer simulation we are part of. These are all metaphysical assumptions. I prefer not to tap into metaphysics and understand this as a psychic process. So there's a lot to learn from psychedelic experiences if you, if you approach them as a psychological tool for self-exploration, for knowing thyself. I may use as an example, I had an incredibly powerful, actually it was powerfully dissociative experience that I had with DMT once, in which my whole sense of being, being who I am was completely completely destroyed. And I was casting this other, mode of being that I didn't have words for, and I was completely baffled, scared, and devastated. And as soon as I came back, I started bringing back some metaphysics to make sense of it. So the first thing that I was telling my friends was I had an encounter with eschaton. Have you heard of, somebody know the word eschaton?
Don't immanentize it.
Well, or the omega point, like the end of times, where that the point or the singularity, the singularity, right? The transhumanism. So that point where everything that ever happened is going to converge in a single point again, and it's going to be done for. I experienced that. I saw that everything that ever happened in the universe was just falling into place, and it was over. The aliens had just they just pushed that switch, and that was it. The universe was being dissolved in front of me, and I was part of that process. But that, again, it took me a year and a half to work with that experience because it was very dissociative, and to process it, and to study a lot, to go through many different sources to try to make sense of what happened to me, until I finally was capable to understand that what happened to me was a profound encounter with deep, deep, deep wounds that I had from trauma that I didn't even know existed, because my psychological self-defense system had blocked my access to that and had made me forget that I had been once, that I had gone through so much trauma. So later on, I figured that what was apparently a dissociative experience that took me away from my body was actually a journey right into my body. So it took me right there where I couldn't reach by any other means. So you see what I'm talking about? Instead of approaching it through metaphysics, is trying to understand how it plays out in your life and in the way that you're relating to the world.
One more question in the corner, and then that's the last one.
I just wanted to clarify an idea that you mentioned of the death of us being downloaded into a hard drive. What did you mean by that? Is that the absence of an organic body is going to be the death of us?
I'm saying that this is not physically. I'm not thinking of it even as something that can be conceived, because I don't think we have minds that are separated from our bodies. So I don't think it can ever happen. That's the first thing. But I'm thinking it's an impulse towards seizing all tension, seizing all dynamics of life, seizing all disruption, seizing all process of creation and destruction, which is the very basis of the cosmos. The cosmos is created out of this, interrelated process of creation and destruction from the beginning. Brian Swim again would say that every 30 billion molecules created, there's like a 30 and 1 billion, and for every 30 billion anti-particles created, there are 30 billion and 1 particle. So all those 30 billions are created and destroyed immediately, but one survives. And this one is going to tell its story when it combines with others. So it's a constant process of creativity and destruction, and which is at the core of then what evolved to become organic processes. And these organic processes are something that we feel with the entirety of our body. And trying to think that we can upload consciousness into computers, it's the Promethean idea that we are indeed capable of having control of everything. This is patriarchy. This is what's happening in the world right now. This is the climate crisis. This is Trump. This is everything that we are seeing. At the core of everything we're experiencing is the idea that eventually, if we just try harder, we are going to be able to control everything. And trying to control everything is this mode of being that is actually destroying ourselves. So the point is the reversal of that. Is that we're not supposed to fight life. If we just surrender to it, we may learn to be in a different mode that is not really trying to control everything and sanitize existence to a point where it becomes death. That's what I'm talking about. It's so devoid of movement that it becomes death. It would be like a death, eternal consciousness in death, which is the point that I'm trying to raise by mentioning 2001 Space Odyssey. That's what happened. He went through that death process and total dissolution.
You want to do...
So, how much time do
we have about 10 minutes.
Only 10 minutes?
Yes, 9:20 right now. So
okay, so I'm going to answer one more question, but I really invite you guys to stay and watch this film for a series of reasons. I'm here in California, on lent money, I'm putting everything that I have into this campaign. I'm doing a film. This film is going to be about all this I'm talking about, but it's not going to be necessarily using this kind of language. It's called involution. So, I'm already giving a hint of what I'm trying to say from the very choice of the title. I'm choosing a word, again, speaking of language, a word that is not devoid of its luminosity. So we don't know how to define this word pretty well, which means it's good. That's what I wanted to state. And in a sense, it's that idea of bringing our attention or bringing our connection back to what's happening here, the movement down on Earth. And I think that's a necessary step that we have to take in our evolutionary process right now. Especially, they're seeing everything that is happening in the world. And I really would appreciate if you can take a look at my campaign, donate, help me get there. I'm only 15 days away from the end of this campaign. I have a lot of, of road to travel before I achieve my goal. And what I'm offering you is, one of my perks is this short film that I created that is sort of a prologue to this film that I want to make. It's about shamanism, using it as like a psychological tool. I'm not talking about shamanism in the film that I want to make. I'm talking about like this bigger questions. But the prologue kind of gives an indication of maybe a way to follow. And for you guys who are here, I'm going to screen the film for free. So I want you to engage. I want to engage you in the message. And if you like it, if you feel it speaks to you, please go and donate to my campaign.
Do you have the campaign email or the web address right now? Or do you know
the easiest way to remember is the website for my film is involution.earth. It's very simple. Everybody can remember. It's not something that you have to write down. Just remember involution.earth. That's it. From there you can find the Indiegogo campaign. And I'm going to show you the page here. That will be the film.
And we'll repost that on our Meetup and Facebook page.
And it's engaging, I like to play, so like I was saying, since I like to play with paradox and images and symbols and myth, I like to use images and overlap images with what is being said, so I don't want to have like a very dry narrative. So I think it's very engaging. Now,
Good. I just have a quick question, actually. We're all musicians here and also artists, and so here you talk about the way you frame the paradigm, the current paradigm we're in with the Prometheus myth and Descartes' separation of mind and body, and all of these challenges with technology and this set of challenges that we're going through right now in our evolution. What do you think the role of music is at this time, and how do you think it works? Like, if you have a metaphysical or a physical perspective about how that works?
This is such a great last question. I think that music, for instance, music is something that can only happen on Earth. Music comes from the Earth. When we go and do shamanic ceremonies, we can understand that the shamans, they are singing the carols or the hymns or whatever they are singing. It's the earth that is speaking to them, and they are just like the vessels through which that song can be sung, right? So there's a poet and a cosmologist from my program also, Drew Dellinger. He has this poem, and he says, "We are scattered shards from shattered stars, and we make music. The earth is a poem. The earth is a song." So I think that music, arts, and performance, all these things, they are totally now into what I'm talking about. They are the modern form of ritual. they are what we have to bring that interconnectedness, to create community and to bring people together. So, kind of thank you for being musicians and for being doing this work. And I hope you know more of us. I think really appreciate about my program is that it's a philosophy program, but everyone plays music and do art in one way or another, because for us there's no difference. There's no dry thinking, artists and thinkers. It's all about one thing, one big thing, like languaging this language of the earth. So that's how I would see it.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. So I think that I have to do is, it should be there. Oh, this is the campaign. I'm going to go to this one. What's happening with the color?
Oh, there you go.
Can you turn off those lights?
Does anyone know where the lights are?
Anybody know where the lights are, the spots?
Right here.
Oh man, that's buffer.
To my back here.
Let it load. I'm gonna have to wait a little bit. So while it's loading, so this is the page on Indiegogo. There are a bunch of perks. Leave it here. Wow, this is taking a long time. I'm afraid I don't have a copy of the film on my iPad. I'm going to try to solve it.
What do you mean?
Oh, no, it's
So the issue is not the projector. She gave a lot of reasons. And again, I don't know if they're she's like kind of highlighted the best.
Is there like that? Is there something like
I mean, more.
is there another sort of level of reality that maybe going on that I don't know?
And
I
she'll,
think that is
yeah, and all of the okay, so just she'll want to take care of the reason why
should be all.
that's me again.
He did that well.
Oh, here's the story about your story.
There's another one.
It's not that one.
Anyway, that's it.
I entered. There we
Almost there. Almost there. It's part of the plan.
Are you based here today or?
No. I lived here for a while. Wow. 10 meters.
ispan Wairakuna yang sirarimu Ang tawang ikasya Rasalina asya.
Almost every shamanism that I'm familiar with, but particularly in the shamanism that you find in the Upper Amazon, sickness is perceived as coming from the outside, and almost always through the malevolence of a human active that somehow there has been a failure of right relationship, so that somebody is moved by envy or jealousy or resentment or anger to hire somebody to project a pathogenic projectile into the body of the person who becomes sick. So that every sickness is an emblem of a failure of a social relationship.
Well, 2,400 years ago, Socrates in Greece criticized the doctors of his day for separating the mind from the body. And so that mind-body separation has been endemic in the Western world from the beginning of Western thought. It became worse, more entrenched with the onset of capitalism and the split between the mind and body that is called Cartesian, Descartes, who separates the mind from the body. And with the modern technology and pharmacology, it now becomes possible to intervene in very dramatic ways, and sometimes very effective ways.
En el abordaje del ser humano, ¿no? Tenemos por lo menos tres dimensiones. Una dimensión física, que es lo que la medicina convencional reconoce más o menos. Una dimensión psicológica, emocional, que también hasta cierto punto el reconocimiento, ¿no? A través de la psicoterapia, la psiquiatría y la psicología. Pero hay otra dimensión, que es una dimensión espiritual, que por lo general está ausente de la medicina occidental y dejado de lado, considero que es un problema de fe, de creencia, de religiosidad, de espiritualidad, una cosa privada que es el orden de la creencia. Entiendo que la creencia en este contexto es una especie de subproducto de la mente.
Sort of implicit in that is this unspoken assumption, sometimes mostly, usually unspoken assumption, that, you know, we're just machines. The organisms are just machines, and if you apply the right monkey wrench, you can fix the machine, and then everything will be okay.
It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. In the name of God. I know what it feels like to be God.
What's happened, I think, our entire civilization, going back several thousand years, was more or less constituted on a sharp differentiation between above and below, between spirit and matter, or mind and body. And that also plays out in the different psychologies. And I think what we're finding is that particularly when people do enough deep inner work, they discover that there is a profound spiritual, transcendent, mystical dimension in our bodies, in nature, in sexual experience, in communion with the rainforest, and at the same time, there's no anybody can have an experience of complete transcendence. That dissociation from the body and from nature, from the earth, that seems to have been almost like a stage that our evolution went through, and it very much is in need of being healed, and I think many people are having that healing experience. It's not one or the other.
Shamanism and traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine of India has always known that mind and body are inseparable, that they're one. We now have the science to prove that.
Shamanism is part of our innate healing capacities. I think that the use of a variety of shamanic techniques still has applicability in the world today. I think shamanism can be a great tool for self-exploration, for understanding our own unconscious. And I think that it probably still has the capacity to do some of the things it did in our ancient ancestors, which was help us form a sense of community and bonding with other people.
It still isn't clear, even after dozens of animal studies, what's happening biochemically. But there does seem to be something happening biochemically, and it's been proposed that the neurotransmitters are somehow being changed, or that the cell signaling is being changed with the ibogaine, but it's still a mystery how it's working on the biochemical level.
It's different in philosophy. At base, that's maybe the most important thing. You know, the magic bullet approach, the idea that therapeutics pharmacology is dependent on the one single compound that targets the single set of receptors that is responsible for the disease or whatever it is. That's the biomedical model.
When people perhaps speak of a substance or of a molecule, they are separating whatever they're referring to from the earth. And all traditions and all First Nation people, meaning all the people that lived a long time before us, were so connected to the earth, it would have never come to mind to speak of a molecule versus the actual plant.
No podemos entrar pensando que es una sustancia. No es una sustancia. Es parte de una relación de los humanos con el reino vegetal que ha sido alimentada con todo el corazón y el amor para un buen propósito.
Extracting something from its totality does not mean that you are engaging with its true nature.
Something's happening. The collective unconscious is opening up, sort of becoming now available. And I believe that it parallels what's happening on the surface of the planet. The process certainly is not just personal, but our friend Chris Baker actually wrote in his book Dark Night, Earth Nova, that maybe at that point we have reached the limits of our own personal therapy, and we are now kind of cleansing the consciousness field of humanity.
El camino de la medicina entonces es el camino de usted reconocer que la Madre Tierra nos está hablando, estamos siendo relacionados dentro de una familia no humana.
Basically, everything breathes together, and everything's part of a larger macrocosm that we are the microcosm of.
Ceremony or psychedelic.
Yeah.
I think we are informed by that idea of the pseudo-loving approach. Yeah, that somehow when we're going through one of these experiences, there's also a problem. Yeah. I wish it were so. Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah, give me the penicillin, solve my soul, heal my soul. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, there are no shortcuts.
It's really good, Marcelo.
Thank you.
Thank you.